I was checking out the FCLCA election alert, which I put into our chat. One of the advantages of being on their mailing list is you can find out the latest bills that are coming up in Sacramento and can instantly respond to them and make a difference with your elected officials. This is like a smaller version of FCL. And I've been involved with Friends Committee of Legislation in California for over 25 years. I took a youth group up there once to lobby in Sacramento, and I was really impressed with FCLCA. Its history goes back to the 1950s. It was started as a Quaker response to the McCarthy era and the loyalty oaths that were proliferating all throughout the state. So I'm really delighted that we have a couple of representatives from FCLCA here. Peggy, who's been incredibly devoted to this organization, and she's on the board, and Kevin, who's been working with FCLCA since 2009. She's very committed to to children, families, workers, and ending poverty in California. She's going to speak to us today a little bit about this faithful Quaker lobby in Sacramento. Okay, Kevin, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Anthony, for inviting me. And this looks like a friendly crowd, so that's great. I am the director of the Friends Committee on Legislation of California and the FCL Education Fund. And I think you all know that Friends is used interchangeably with Quakers. So that's where the word Friends comes from in our organizational title. As Anthony mentioned, we're about to begin our 70th year of advocacy, which is pretty amazing, I think. And the reason that we can do that is because of the support that we've received from Quaker meetings and from people like you. In fact, we have many supporters who come from all different faith backgrounds. So I want to make sure you know that and invite you to join with us in our work. And I'll give you a few ideas of how you might want to do that. We want to be useful and of service to you. We do now have 2 staff members here in Sacramento. And we also work with a legislative consultant, Jim Lindbergh, who you all may know. He was on our staff. And we do lobbying. We do direct lobbying at the Capitol. So we do everything that the lobbyist would do. We weigh in on specific bills. We co-sponsor bills. We testify at hearings in the legislature. All those things that professional lobbyists do. I think equally important and an effort that I'd like to increase is that we want to support grassroots lobbying, because I think that everyone should be a lobbyist. I think that in our system, it's really important for legislators to hear from us, from people like you, who have strong moral convictions, who have a voice of conscience, and we want to be an organization that supports that. So again, I invite you to join with us, to visit our websites, to see the bills that we're working on, and to join our action alert list, which is what Anthony was referring to. So over the past 10 years, I'll just say a little bit about FCLCA, and then I'd like to mention a few things about the legislative process. And I know some of you probably are very familiar with it, so just bear with me, but I think it's important to give a little context to how we work. And then I'd like to talk about a few of the urgent action items that are up before the legislature right now. So over the past 10 years, FCLCA has co-sponsored 11 bills. And co-sponsorship is kind of being there from the beginning to hopefully a satisfying end where the bill is signed by the governor. I believe all of those have been passed by the legislature. A few were vetoed by governors, and many were related to reforming the criminal justice system, which is something that FCLCA has been engaged in for many decades. And in fact, in probably in 60s, 70s, 80s, FCLCA was often almost a lone voice in terms of criminal justice reform. Now, thankfully, there are a lot more organizations involved, a lot of foundations funding criminal justice reform. So things have changed quite a bit. In the last, well, always we have been involved in efforts to address poverty and economic justice. Particularly in the last few years, I personally have been involved in many efforts to address poverty among children in California. You all probably know that California has the highest rate of child poverty in the nation. And we think this is really a shameful situation in such a wealthy state. So we often, or I would say almost exclusively on those big type of issues, work in coalitions. So we're small. Obviously, we're a small organization. I kind of chuckled when Anthony said we're a smaller version of FCNO. We have 1.5 staff positions. But I think that because of volunteers and supporters and the Friends meetings and being able to work in coalitions with other partners, we've been able to kind of add something to the mix and have a strong impact given our size. So like I said, we encourage people to lobby directly to their legislators. Now, 2020 was a really unusual year in the legislature. I don't know if you know, but it kind of came and went. They would start a session and then they would stop because of COVID, and then they would start again. And then typically thousands of bills are introduced in a year, in a legislative year. And that number was cut way down, but the legislature focused on some of the most urgent issues. And even though it was a very unusual year, actually some very important legislation was passed. And the other interesting thing was, in some ways, more people were able to participate because the legislative visits were held like we are now on Zoom. So people were able to attend legislative sessions instead of having to come to Sacramento to testify at a hearing or to visit their legislator. They could do it via Zoom. Also, hearings are held on specific bills, and people were able to call in to the hearings by phone instead of having to appear in person at the Capitol. So, I think it's important to look at what opportunities this presents for grassroots participation, and we definitely saw a lot of it in 2020, and we're already seeing it in 2021. I want to just back up a little and talk about how the legislature works. So the California state legislature works on 2-year sessions. So we have just started the first year of this 2-year session. And of course, there's 2 houses. There's 80 people in the assembly and 40 in the Senate. And bills are typically introduced in January and February. And so right now we're still kind of assessing what bills have been introduced. This is really the beginning of the session. This is a very busy time to kind of see what's going to be, up this year. And I would say by March or April, we'll have a better sense of what's going to move forward. Each bill, of course, is introduced by an author who's a legislator or many authors, but typically there's a principal author. And then we'll go through a series of hearings. We'll go through hearings in the House that it originates in. So if it's an assembly bill, it will go through a policy committee hearing. And I want to say something that I didn't know when I joined FCLCA. That time before a bill is heard in committee is crucial for grassroots, for public input. that is really when the staff at the Capitol is preparing an analysis for the members of the committee. And they're the ones that are going to determine whether that bill moves forward. So that's when organizations like ours and people like you need to weigh in on a bill. That's when you want to submit a comment, when you want to work through your organizations to submit a letter of support or opposition. You want to make sure that you do it in a timely way, at least a week before the committee hearing, so that your opposition support, sometimes your rationale will be included in the analysis that is given to the members of the committee. And I remember when I came into FCLCA, I asked Dale, who's still there, by the way, my colleague, I said, okay, so we're trying to get people to send in letters, or, we're trying to get people to, in this case, I think it was letters on a specific bill. How many people would we need to get in order to have an impact? And I wonder if you can guess what the number was. It was 20. He said 20 organizations or people weighing in make a real impact, because they figured that for every one letter, there's like 1,000. It represents 1,000. So I just want to stress that that's why it's so important to have organizations, not just FCLCA, but many other, and some of your religious groups, I'm sure, have lobbyists or legislative advocates. It's so important to be engaged in that process. So if a bill passes out of a committee, then it will usually they often have a fiscal impact. They'll go before the Appropriations Committee. And then hopefully they will make it to the floor if it's a bill that we support. And again, that's when it's important to contact your legislators. That action alert that we have up now is to your legislators. And our system allows it to automatically go to your legislators. It will recognize who that is by your address. So, and then of course, those bills have to go to the other house and pass. Once it passes through both houses, then it goes to the governor. And again, we have a time period, usually in the month of September. The legislature usually ends around the end of August. We have the month of September to influence the governor, to let the governor know how we feel about specific bills. So that's a little bit of background on the legislative process. I also want to really encourage you that if you are particularly interested in a bill, that you do some research on it, and then you'll find some resources on our website about how to do that. But you may want to learn how to do a visit to your legislator. And we actually have a whole book about the legislative process. So if you're interested, go to our website and look for our book called Bring Your Voice. And it will, I hope, have everything you want to know about the legislative process and how you can weigh in, how you can organize a visit to your legislator, develop talking points, how to contact their office. Of course, this will be somewhat different now because we're doing it on Zoom, but I think the basic principles are the same. How you find out about a bill, get information about it, track it through the process, etc. Besides bills, I think the other, maybe sometimes even more important aspect of what the legislature does is to pass a state budget. So I believe Governor Newsom's proposed state budget for this coming fiscal year is $227 billion. So if you think about the state budget, it's really a reflection of the values that the state holds, right? Because where we put our money shows what we value, what we think is important. So FCLCA and many of our coalition partners work quite a bit on the budget, on the state budget. The state budget is a separate process from the bill process. It has its own budget committees. Each house has the budget committee. And then there are budget subcommittees for different areas. For example, there's a budget committee on state administration, and that sounds kind of boring, but actually One of the main issues FCLCA has been working on is the California Earned Income Tax Credit. Are you all familiar with that? That is a tax credit for low-income people. And it's been shown to be one of the most effective anti-poverty measures there is. There's a federal tax credit and there's a state tax credit. So FCLCA has been involved for several years in different types of expansion of that credit to different sectors. So we achieved expansion to people under 25, over 65, self-employed workers, and this past year, a really wonderful inclusion, I would say inclusion rather than expansion, undocumented workers who file taxes with individual taxpayer numbers rather than Social Security numbers. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people and their children, because this, benefits their children also. So that subcommittee is over that because it's a tax credit, they that's part of their purview. So depending on what issue you're working on the budget, you can listen to these budget hearings, and there's a segment of public comment after the hearing. And so we encourage people and organizations to weigh in during public comment, and also to submit in advance, to submit letters and comments to the committees. If you go on the Assembly website and the Senate website and look for the budget committees, you will find ways to submit comments. You'll find ways to listen to the hearings, to see the hearing agenda, and phone numbers to call in during public comment. I want to talk about, I think I have 3 issues quickly that are coming up right now. So because we're in a state of emergency with the pandemic and the economic effects of the pandemic, the legislature is taking up an immediate action budget that it wants to get passed in the next few weeks. Typically, a budget is finalized for the next fiscal year, is finalized by the end of June, and the process takes from January through the end of June. But because we're in this special circumstances right now, they're going to do the budget in several phases. So one I think that's really important, and the one that I've just put out an action alert on, is expanding paid sick leave days. The federal paid sick days is expiring, and we need the budget to include paid sick days. So that's really important. We also need to expand California Earned Income Tax Credit to include another payment of $600. And that's being proposed by the governor, called the Golden State Stimulus. That's part of his stimulus package, and we support that. But we also want additional help for immigrant families. And why? Well, obviously because they're suffering a lot during the pandemic, but also because they're excluded from the federal Earned Income Tax Credit. They're excluded from unemployment insurance. They're excluded from other federal benefits. And the state needs to support these families. And so we're asking for additional support through the Cal EITC for them and their children. And again, we're talking about probably 600,000 people. We also obviously support an extension to the eviction moratorium, and those bills have been passed by the legislature. There was an agreement reached by the leadership of the legislature and the governor, and that those bills are expected to be passed. And so what they do is extend the moratorium until June 30th. And they also set up a framework for distributing federal money to provide compensation to landlords and to protect tenants from eviction. In terms of what else we expect this year, again, it's early days. So we're just now seeing the bills that are coming through. We expect some police accountability bills to be reintroduced. We expect some environmental legislation, corporate accountability for carbon emissions, and a number of other bills. So, I do want to mention one other really important effort that we're involved in, and we have been involved in for many years, and that is the expansion of Medi-Cal to people over 65 who are undocumented. We believe that that's critical right now. I mean, it's just fair and just, but it's also critical right now during the pandemic. So we'll be supporting that. As we take positions on bills, I will do my best to keep up with the website, the Action Center website. So right now we have two websites. We have our main website, which is www.fclca.org. And then if you go to that website, you'll see Action Center. Action Center is really where we keep up with the latest. We'll start posting bills that we're supporting. We'll put the action alerts there. And we encourage you to sign up for the action alerts, and then you'll get them automatically to your email. So, I mean, the other ways that you can always email me if you're interested in participating in a virtual visit. And if we know of one that's being set up in your district, we will clue you in on that. My email address is my first name, KEV, like victory, AN @fclca.org. So, I would encourage you to check out our website and our resources page. I would encourage you to sign up for the action alerts if you'd like to become a contributing member. We would love that also. Stay tuned. Things are just beginning this year. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'd love to continue this conversation with you in different ways. And Peggy is a wonderful representative of FCLCA down south. And I will say that I would love to shore up our work in Southern California. I think Southern California is just so important to the whole state, of course. And, you all are such a large part of our population. And I would really like for us to have a stronger presence in Southern California. And thanks to Peggy, we are having that. But I just want you to know that I really admire the work you all are doing there. And I know you've had a really difficult time with the COVID-19. And I've been thinking about all my friends in Southern California, and I'm so glad I get to talk to you today. So ask me anything. I don't know if I have the answer, but I would love to keep talking with you about the important work that we're all doing.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We do have a couple of hands up, and I just want to note that Doc Ruby joined us also this morning a little bit late, but on the call. Steve Brody, you had a question?
Yes, Kevin, thank you so much. We're immensely grateful to you that you wake up every morning to do this work in our name and in the name of justice. I have a bunch of questions. I'll only ask one, and maybe on a second round I'll come back. I believe that your organization is deeply committed to abolishing the death penalty. Our organization is. It's my understanding that it has to be on the ballot of the people to vote it out, but there are two ways to get on the ballot. There's the very expensive signature process, which I know cost over $2 million last time to gather signatures up and down California. But it can also be put on the ballot through the legislature. I'm wondering what, if anything, with a governor who has issued a moratorium on executions his first few months in office, the climate, the movement against the death penalty, do you have, is that a criminal justice issue for the Friends in Sacramento? And are you hearing any movement in that regard?
Peggy may know more than I do. I will tell you, we do have our legislative consultant, Jim Lindbergh, is participating in the Anti-Death Penalty Coalition, which I'm sure you all are part of also. And I believe that they have, I know that they have interest in putting through some bills this year. And I believe, I'm not going to say this for sure, but I think that there is some movement to have the legislature. Peggy, do you know about this? I think there is a move to have some kind of statement by the legislature on the death penalty. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I am not aware of current action, but what I can say is that since I first started working with FCLCA in the early 1980s, at every board meeting, we always brought up the death penalty for, as Kevin was saying, for a long, long time. We seem to be alone in California on this issue. We've gone back and forth about, should we go for completely abolishing the death penalty, or should we try to chip away at it by excluding some categories of Californians from the death penalty? Kind of a long discussion about which would be the most ethical position. And of course, it has been on the ballot now and rejected. I really do personally, though, have hope that the voters of California, however we might approach it, the ballot process is hairy indeed, but yeah, I feel like there is really a strong chance that this time the voters of California will decide we don't want to kill people to prove that killing is wrong anymore.
If you want to send me your email, I will send an email to Jim and ask him what he knows about that.
Great. I'd love you to hook me up with those guys. Thank you very much for those answers.
I want to follow up because I know that that Peggy's been very involved with the criminal justice work of FCLCA and also has some personal experience. So would you share a little bit about where those efforts are right now with criminal justice reform? I know that's been your passion for a long time.
As Kevin said, in the beginning, we were sort of a lone voice that too many Californians, and particularly too many Californians of color, were being incarcerated. There was a spree of building prisons in the early 80s when Duke Majan was governor. And our stance was, if we build prisons, we will fill prisons, which of course has come to pass with just disastrous results for a long time. We were the leading imprisonment entity on earth, California was, but there's been a lot of progress, in my opinion. The passage of Proposition 57, right, Kevin? Yeah, which we worked on, yes, extensively, particularly to address youth who had been given multiple life sentences when they were not yet adults. And I am also an Alternatives to Violence project facilitator, going directly into prisons. Right now, of course, we can't, but we are meeting on Zoom a lot and offering the Alternatives to Violence Project classes on Zoom. Yeah, if people are interested, it's a tremendous program. When I do go to a prison, I mean, when I did, I virtually went monthly for many years. I always talk about FCLCA as being a real vehicle by which prisoners themselves can have a voice in this process. And now, like very soon, I will be attending a lunch meeting for the San Luis Obispo. That's always where I went to prison visit, the San Luis Obispo group. And it's being led by a young man, young by my standards, who he had 3 life sentences, but because of his stellar work with other inmates, teaching peace through AVP and also mentioning FCLCA quite a bit, he is now out, going to school and leading our meetings that we have once a month of that group. So I also happen to be married to a person who is doing life in prison, and our relationship has centered around bringing much more justice to the system, ending, for example, the torture that went on in places like the Pelican Bay State Prison, Security Housing Unit, torture. It's such a thrill for me to go into the back room of a prison and see a big sign there for the officers. It is your job to help these people, to help them parole and re-enter society. And that is a sea change from the past, when I would say that most officers thought that their job was to punish, that just being in prison wasn't punishment enough, that they had to heap punishment on top of that that state imposed punishment. Seeing a real transformation brought about, I want to say, not by hating those people whose livelihood is tied to there being lots of prisoners and those prisoners being very violent. Humanizing the officers has been a big part of FCL's work, in my opinion. And that is what has made at least a difference for me, that people can change if they're loved, if they're just automatically despised because of what they do. Not so much movement is possible. So I've adopted the same attitude towards state legislators. I started off just hating the system and anybody that was involved in it. That was a real futile effort on my part. I see in this group that the ground of being is love is the answer, and that FCLCA enables me to interact with my elected officials in a loving way. And that's the heart of it for me.
Anthony, I saw a comment about Catholic participation in the death penalty. Well, to abolish the death penalty, and that's really true. Actually, we've been working with Catholics and other groups on that issue, and it reminded me that I wanted to mention that one of the things I'm excited about, we've been working on the last few years, is an interfaith coalition at the state level. So FCLCA helps coordinate the California Interfaith Coalition, which is Catholics, Lutheran, Jewish groups, and Muslim groups, and that have representatives at the state level. And we work together primarily on poverty issues, but we worked to keep immigrants from being deported. If you'll recall the so-called sanctuary state bill. So we do work at that level. We always work. I think I mentioned we almost always work in coalition. I think when we were referring to being kind of alone, that was more on sentencing and building prisons back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. But I think working in coalition, like you all, I mean, you all are an amazing example of it. It's the way to go. We have to do that. We have to join together and find common ground. And believe me, there are differences. You know, there are many differences, but there are certainly things that unite us, and we need to build on that.
First of all, I'd like to say that the Peace Alliance stands with you in terms of ending the death penalty. One of our cornerstones is humanizing the justice system, and we're very, very strong advocates of restorative justice to replace our current system of punishment, which I think we all agree does not work. And throwing away a human life behind one mistake, well, I don't need to go on and on about that, but I had a question for Kevin. I know that for California legislation, AB 15 and 16 kind of got rolled into SB 91. Unfortunately, this is a legislation to extend the COVID relief for all of us. And the original legislation went through December of this year. SB 91, I understand, only goes until June. Am I correct on that, Kevin?
I think it's June 30th.
Yeah.
For SB 89 and 91.
So we're done with AB 15 and 16. We're now focused on SB 91, correct?
Yeah, I believe there's two bills, SB 89 and SB 91, that are kind of jointly cover those issues. They were the result of a deal worked out. You're right. Those other two assembly bills were, I mean, I heard about them a while ago, so they've been on the table for a while, and this was a deal that was worked out among leadership and the governor's office, and you know, this is where they landed. So I think there's definitely some grassroots not opposition, but problems with the new bills. But you know, I also think many of the progressive organizations are supporting them because they believe it has to happen right away, and this is what we can get now. But I think there's also, you know, some concern that we need to work on some of the gaps and the things that are not covered by the bills that were passed, and that there needs to be more work done after, you know, after these two are signed. We need to, or the organizations that are working on it need to keep pushing for more.
Yeah, my state senator is Hirschberg, so I would imagine he was part of the deal making.
Probably, yeah.
Thanks.
I
Vida?
don't know.
Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
I think it was done at the very highest level. There was a recognition that something needed to happen quickly because that moratorium was ending. I think it ends tomorrow, I believe, or Sunday.
Yeah, and just one last thing. I know that there's a big push on Medi-Cal for all. Of course, I've been involved with that since universal health care, which it really needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in view of the fact of the realization of what COVID has taught us, there's more and more of a need for health coverage for everyone, because disease does not care whether you have papers or not, or what color you are, or any of that. And I think the realization has now opened it up, and I think that the governor is going to have to get pressed to actually let this finally come to light.
Yeah. It actually, the expansion to seniors, well, I don't know, seniors, 65 seems young to me, but maybe that's because
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have seniors, but to people over 65 was actually in his budget proposal for last year. And then of course, it was removed when COVID happened, but I think that's where people think is most likely we can get to with this budget is 65 and older. And then of course, there's definitely a strong movement to expand it to everyone. And then beyond that for single payer. But I guess politics is the art of the possible. So a lot of what I found with this work is that, it's a calculation of what we can get. And of course, a lot of times people ask for more than they think they can get, because then they might get more than they would have gotten, so
Yeah, to deal negotiation, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one last thing. Universal health care would save them money. And this is what most people don't understand. And of course, we're fighting the insurance companies. So
thank you so much for the work that you do. I have such confidence in your group. And Kevin, you already answered my question about whether you work with other groups, and you talked about the Interfaith. I was thinking about Elizabeth Show, Council of Churches, and the Catholic lobbyists, and you said you do have interfaith work.
Yeah, they're part of our coalition. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And then I just want to speak to Peggy, because your attitude, your loving care comes through in your talk, and that is so helpful and helps us know you personally and really back your work up.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I did have a couple of questions. I wanted to mention we have a speaker coming up in February from the Drop LWAP, Life Without Parole campaign. And I know that often when people do try to abolish the death penalty, they sometimes offer life without parole as the alternative to it. And I think it's important to avoid that. I got a letter recently from a prisoner who gets Turning the Tide, the paper I put out, and he was somebody who had been on a life without parole sentence for a really long time. And when Jerry Brown left office, there was a campaign, and Brown did commute the without parole portion of a lot of lifer sentences and making them eligible for parole. This man was finally going to get paroled after, I think, 27 years, on a life sentence. So I just wanted to urge people to think about that aspect of it. And then just in general, decarceration. My question is, I dropped into the chat something from ALEC, which is the, I forget, it's the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's a right-wing association of state legislators around the country with various corporations that push so-called free market economics. And they draft model legislation and have pushed it through state legislatures around the country of a very reactionary nature. And I'm wondering if there's anything comparable on the progressive side, or are you in touch with similar bodies in other states? And if so, is there anything about sort of taking the initiative to propose legislation as opposed to only respond to what's coming up? I mean, I think California has a tremendous potential impact on providing examples to other states of progressive policies that could be enacted. So I'm wondering, do the Friends have similar committees in other parts of the country, or other coalitions like the one you mentioned, the Interfaith Coalition here, that are offering model legislation that could be adopted across the country at the state level? Thank you.
Well, I think I mentioned we have co-sponsored 11 bills. So those were all bills that we worked in coalition, I think, except for one, where we originated the legislation. We brought it to the author, to the legislator, and introduced it. I think that you're right, that I think you were implying that California can really be a model for the rest of the country. In fact, a lot of the legislation we worked on and expanding the earned income tax credit, those things have inspired other states to do the same thing. So that's a really important point. When I'm telling people why I think they should give money to FCLCA or why they should join FCLCA, I always mention that, California really is a bellwether for the nation. So when you support FCLCA or the work of statewide organizations, you really are going beyond California, because in many ways people look to California for progressive legislation. And to be honest, we're pretty lucky that we have a lot of progressive legislators. I was thinking that if I had to do this work in my home state of Kentucky, I think it would be hard to have a smile on my face very often. But, you can't take anything for granted. You have to organize, you have to be active, you have to propose. And we are actually, this call that I'm gonna have to jump off at 9:10 to get on is the California Dream Alliance. And I think the Dream Alliance is an alliance of progressive organizations across California that support each other's legislation and work together to really build a California for all. And so we include labor, religious, social service organizations, advocacy organizations, a huge alliance of organizations that want to see more justice in California and more equity. So that may be the closest thing that I can think of that crosses many sectors. We have labor unions, we have all kinds of legal organizations, community organizations. And, we work together to cross sectors. So it isn't just, criminal justice working on their issues and poverty organizations working on their issues. We're really seeing the connections in California among all these different areas and how they can work together. So, I think that's really encouraging. I think having the religious organizations work together on things they can agree on is really important. Because ultimately, we have to work together. And so, I'm excited that those coalitions exist. And I will tell you that I believe, and at least from my experience, there have always been coalitions that work together, but I would say in the last 5-6 years, we've seen a real strengthening of those coalitions, possibly in response to Trump. But I just think that's the natural progression of political work, is to work more closely together and to see that cross-sectional connection and work for that.
When you're lobbying for restorative justice and you run into people who believe that punishment is the way, how often do you bring up, this to me is really critical as a former elementary school teacher. What did the child do? What did this 10-year-old child or this infant or this 15-year-old child do to be sentenced to having mom or dad taken away from them and having to grow up in a single parent family because of what the father or mother did? Is this an argument that that you put out there?
I got involved in restorative justice through FCLCA. We had a presentation in a 2016 newsletter about it, and I went on to study the subject, and I actually participate in a weekly 2.5 hour class. It'll be tonight. On compassionate witnessing, on teaching people restorative practices in really listening. And a lot of inmates are now trained in restorative practices, and they. I have heard eloquent arguments from prisoners about, and also I was a teacher of kids in custody for 41 years, seeing, you know, that somebody go into that pipeline at maybe 8 or 9 years of age and never emerge. That is a real focus of a lot of individuals, whether or not, you know, I would love to see it a central argument for all of us who want to work for peace and justice, that children are different from adults, and if all they know is punishment, that's what their lives are going to be about. Not just you know, punishing others will be part of it. So yeah, I feel like that's a vital area, Carol, that kind of seems to me like when the United States didn't have the USSR as our enemy anymore, we turned on our own youth, and time to cut that out. Does that answer your question, Carol?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
My question is not just kids who go into the system, but kids whose parents go into the system.
Yeah.
So they're being punished for
Right.
the crime that their parents are alleged to have committed.
Through the Alternatives to Violence Project, I've sat in many circles of prisoners who are determined to transform their own lives. They can talk about the crimes that they committed just as calmly as possible, but when it comes to talking about their children and how their children have been disenfranchised by this system, that's when they weep. And I also correspond right now. I can't go into prison, so I'm corresponding with prisoners. Every one of my friends that I'm writing to has children from whom they are deeply estranged. If you're a kid, visiting your parent in prison is hard. Many barriers to it. And there's lots of vested interests that want to keep it very expensive for you to have a relationship with your dad or mom in prison. Telephone calls cost a fortune. We've been working on the vendors that just rob families that are already poor so that the kids cannot have access to their parents. I feel like a real start has happened in that area, but yes, much more to do. It's a particular area of extreme pain that we were talking earlier about FCL never actually proposes bills, right? But a bill that I would love to see proposed is that California inmates would make minimum wage for their work. Then they could begin to support their children. And I do also think that on the day that bill was passed, the population would split in half, because the slave labor that runs prisons would then be gone. They're not slaves to the state, they're slaves to corporations. But if somebody's up for proposing a bill for minimum wage for California prisoners, boy, you could count on my support.
Yes, hi, it's Stephen Fisk here. Question to change, a bit of a change in the focus, is that Governor Brown was widely criticized for his support of fracking interests pertaining to the environment. What have you been doing in terms of the environmental crisis?
I believe since 2017, we've been taking positions on environmental bills. But the ones that we're most involved with, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go in just a few minutes, but I'll finish up this question. I believe it was SB 100. That was the De Leon's bill to reach carbon neutral by 2045. Is that right, Peggy? I think that's the right bill. And the role we played in that bill, and then a role we played in bills in the last couple of years on plastics, on plastic pollution, SB 54 and AB 1080, was to organize the religious communities, the religious advocates in support of those bills. And I think that has been the major contribution. We're not a major player in the environmental area, except that we do belong to Green California, which is an information sharing alliance on legislation and issues on the environment and climate change. And so we tend to follow their lead in terms of supporting bills. But I think, again, I think the main contribution we made was getting religious advocates involved in those campaigns. And that probably will continue to be true, that we will take positions on environmental bills. You know, I would not say that we're a leader in terms of environmental legislation, but we certainly recognize that many of our constituents and our supporters, that's one of their top, if not the top concern, is climate change and the environment. And so we really want to have a voice there, at least as FCLCA, and you know what we can do to encourage other faith-based groups to participate. And again, I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I'm going to have to go in just a few minutes. Can I just say thank you? And I really enjoyed talking with you all and seeing your faces. And you know, I'm so glad you're doing the work that you're doing, and I hope we can collaborate more in the future. And please feel free to email me, kevan@fclca.org. Visit our website, sign up for whatever you'd like to sign up for. And I hope to see all of you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. You did a wonderful job.
Steve Rhodey, you had another question?
Yes. Thank you, Kevin, as you leave. We appreciate it so much. Good luck and be safe. Peggy, this actually is a good question for you. There has been so much controversy over eliminating money bail. It was a goal of many progressive organizations. We had legislation to eliminate money bail that was put up to go to the people. we are back to money bail being on the books, while many of us want an alternative to money bail, but not a risk assessment that itself would be racist in furthering various racial stereotypes and demonizing people of color in the very process of considering their release without bail. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts on that. I understand Hertzberg, only within the last few days, has introduced SB 262 to address this, but many of us are cautious about his bills. So I'm eager to hear what you think, and if you see FCLCA taking a role in this.
This is an area where I have a little bit of experience, although I may be forgetting the names of the bills, but as program clerk of FCLCA, I was in charge of organizing our take on the ballot propositions. We were a sponsor. I think it was SB 2 originally that
10.
Yeah, 10. Yeah, that sought to eliminate cash bail in favor of the risk assessment panels. I forgive me for forgetting the number, because I read that the law until my eyes glazed over. And then, we were, and so we came out in favor of Proposition 25. That was on the ballot this last time. But to our dismay, we started seeing all these ads from the NAACP saying that the risk assessment panels were racist. Of course, the voters reinstated cash bail. There has to be a way of eliminating cash bail, because it targets the most vulnerable people every time, and is, the few ads that I saw countering it mentioned our point, which is it all depends on how much money you have, on how much time you do. And that, of course, is an outrageous situation to me. I'm glad I've been up to my neck in all kinds of things, and I'm glad to hear that there is a bill, and we definitely will be looking into it. FCLCA, we've had to reorganize, and Kevan is awesome and wonderful, but we have lost Jim Lindbergh as a regular staff member, and he was really, really up on this issue. But whatever we can do to eliminate cash bail, I just feel it's imperative, and that we be able to educate the people as to I'm hearing these ads saying it eliminates the right to post bail. Well, yes. Yeah, I don't think that as much as a right as a horrible obligation.
Just to follow up for everybody's benefit, unfortunately, the NAACP during the last election was in the grip of a woman who was being paid as a lobbyist. So many of the ads you saw on television with this legendary organization, the NAACP, taking positions which many of us were shocked by, The truth is, behind the scenes, she was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. This has been covered by the LA Times and other newspapers, and the NAACP is investigating that. I believe she was removed from her position or resigned. So that did throw us all for a loop. On the other hand, there were genuine debates over cash bail and risk assessment. So I think it is a moment. There are even progressives who think there should be a small money bail amount if someone wants to be released who might otherwise, under a faulty risk assessment, not be released. So it's a complex issue. You're absolutely right. It is a scandal that an innocent person waiting trial cannot be released when they are presumed innocent because they don't have money for bail, while someone who will later be proven guilty, and I accept the presumption of innocence, but a wealthy person can stay out of jail. So there's no question this is both economic justice issue and largely a racial justice issue. I'm hopeful that as FCLCA reviews the new legislation, I think we all need a hand in this rather than standing aside from it. And I'm sure this organization will want to stay abreast of it. And I pledge to keep everybody here informed. I think a progressive coalition will eventually emerge. Geraldine put in the chat that New Jersey has a risk assessment that is race neutral, that does not perpetuate stereotypes and prejudice. So I think there's a good way to handle this, and I hope we're all up to that work.
This is not directly involved with FCLCA work, but as many of you know, I'm involved with housing justice issues. And one of the big obstacles to having good policies around housing in our state has been local governments, they call it local control, which usually means blocking upzoning, blocking rent control, and standing in the way often of the kind of policies that would really help to alleviate homelessness and housing insecurity. So the state legislature has been taking lead in proposing legislation that would really make a difference. Things like accessory dwelling units, proposing that churches be allowed to build affordable housing on church land, trying to, pressure the cities to meet what are called RHNA goals, regional housing needs assessment. Our city has joined a whole bunch of other cities to oppose these measures, especially the RHNA numbers, even though their need is real. We have a desperate need for more housing, especially affordable housing. But this local municipalities are resisting because of local property owners who want to protect their best interests. So I just want to say that really we need to work at the state level to address issues like this, that local governments are not taking as seriously as they need to. And I'll keep you informed when state bills come up around housing justice, because I think we need to support them.
I do have, I'm sorry to come in so late on this, but I do have another question for Peggy. Peggy, your enthusiasm about restorative practices really came through as I was hearing you. And I wonder if you can help us to get a better picture of what the future of it is in criminal justice practices in general, and also in dealing with at-risk children. What is your sense of that?
I am extremely optimistic that restorative practices it will grow, and I'm thinking become the norm. For example, there's a restorative justice counselor now in every LA high school. and incarcerated people are you know, joining all kinds of listening circles in order to learn practices that will result in a peaceful solution where still, you know, wrongdoing is acknowledged, but the purpose is to heal rather than perpetuate through punishment. The Alternatives to Violence Project, which was started by Quakers in 1975, and has had a pretty strict format, now is integrating restorative practices into all our activities. And it's happening in schools a lot. I visited a middle school not too long ago that once was covered with graffiti, almost daily violent acts like stabbing. This is a middle school. This place is notorious. Went back to the school after not being there for about 10 years, had a long conference with the principal on a Friday afternoon, and she said, all of our kids now have mentors. We have restorative practices circles every week, and the kids can't wait to participate. And we have the place was sparkling clean, no graffiti, and we have, our violence has gone like 90% down. Because the kids are invested now in caring for one another, and it's so rewarding for them.